Pablo va a hablar desde el podio.
Yo creo que hay que dejar como el podio. Ahí, no sé. Tal vez más a la izquierda. Un poquito más zoom porque si no, no se ve la pantalla. Sí, yo creo
Claro,
que.
podio. Bueno, podemos poner esta no.
O más arriba. No se mueve.
Esta no uno y en el una que sea.
Lo más cerca posible, sí, para que la pantalla se vea. Si no, lo agarra con mucho reflejo.
¿Cómo así? Solo tres personas, solo tres hijos.
E igual va uno por uno, entonces.
Ah, bueno. Ahí puede ser.
Ok.
Entonces, sí, como uno y dos, nada más uno. Uno la toma abierta. Entonces, si quieren, pueden empezar con esto. Y luego lo pasamos.
Sí, muchas gracias. ¿Ya podemos empezar? ¿Ya podemos empezar?
Ok. Oops. Nothing that. No worry.
Yeah, you okay? Yeah. You'll find your hotel?
Yes.
Yeah, we can start.
Okay.
So, good morning, everybody. We are starting the second day of our workshop. Today we will have two talks this morning and two talks this afternoon. And lunch, maybe then we can give some tips for people who went to. But I guess there are a lot of restaurants. Because we are in the foods. So the first speaker is Owen Goldin from University. He's the keynote speaker of our event, and he will speak. The title of his talk is Family, Contradictories and Compromise. Please.
Thank you everyone for being here today. No running Spanish? Okay. Thank you so much, Pablo, for his hospitality, and Jean-Yves for this whole series of programs, and for all of the interesting work on the sphere of operation over the last several years, and for inviting me to submit a proposal. Maybe I'm moving too close. There is a handout with a translation by McCurrahan of the whole all of the fragments of Parmenides' poem that we have. And it's a pretty good translation. I think it's in the my left-hand side in the back of the room, if you need it. Parmenides can be. How's this? We want it to be loud, but not too loud. How's this? Are we good?
It's off.
It's off.
It's falling.
Green is go. How about now? Are we good now?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
Parmenides can be considered the first logician of the West, for he was the first to explicitly consider the structural features that govern logos, or get a word logic, which is speech and thought as such. He articulated the principle of non-contradiction, or at least a precursor of it, and explicitly indicated that it governs reality, speech, and thought. In doing so, he achieved some clarity concerning contradiction as such, a relationship between opposites, such that one or the other must hold, while it is impossible for them both to hold. Less clear is whether Parmenides achieved such clarity concerning the logical relation of contrariety. He certainly did not do so in regard to contrary propositions. Propositions P and Q, such that if P, then not Q, if Q, then not P, but not Q, if and only if not P. But did he do so in regard to what we would call pairs of contrary predicates? Ryan was talking about the distinction in Aristotle yesterday. Such that the two, while being such that the one is not the other, disallowing co-presence, nonetheless allow for intermediates which are neither contrary. The logical relation of contrariety is clearly excluded from the way of truth, the section of Parmenides' poem in which the goddess lays down guidelines to which what is must conform. But much of the poem was devoted to the way of doxa, opinion, which arguably adheres to a version of the principle of non-contradiction, but is nonetheless guided by an implicit logic more permissive than that of the way of truth. If we were to fill out the logic behind the way of doxa, would we have to attribute to Parmenides the recognition of contrariety? This is not a question that has received much attention. This is no doubt because while the argument of the way of truth makes explicit appeal to logical questions of what is sayable and thinkable, the way of doxa is presented without argument, and explicit appeals to logic are absent. Nonetheless, reconstruction of the cosmology and natural science of the way of doxa often does so in terms of the interplay and interrelationships of contraries. This is no doubt because the two primary causes at work can be understood as the hot and the cold. These two were understood as logically contrary predicates by Aristotle, and Aristotle explicitly understood the Milesian philosophers who preceded Parmenides as employing such contraries, even though they were surely innocent of logic as such. This is why the way of doxa, which builds on and corrects the Milesian accounts, has been said to make appeal to contraries, but has Parmenides himself recognized logical contrariety? It would be more exciting if I could say yes, but my argument today is no. The two fundamental principles of the way of doxa are what we might consider physical contradictories. There's not a line of Parmenides' poem that is not faced with formidable interpretive difficulties. These are philological, as the Greek text of key lines are in question, hermeneutic, and philosophical. We don't have time to go into all of that today. The basic account that I hear sketch, like any account of the import and argument of the poem, can be challenged at every turn. The best that I can do is to initially present an account of the philosophical argumentation of much of the text, which is not terribly heterodox. Less than a fifth of Parmenides' poem has survived. It's in 3 parts. In the first, the author relates a journey by chariot that he undertook, led by maidens in the presence of a goddess, who promises to instruct the lad in the ways of inquiry. Only one way is to be taken, that of esti, a way which totally excludes the other real possible way, that of it is not. The second path has some kind of status, as it is at least a seeming possibility, but in truth that way is, quote, intractable, unquote. It can neither be said nor thought. Accordingly, it cannot be a way that cognitively takes us to reality. Given the exclusion of it is not, the goddess deduces a number of features that must be excluded from what is. It can neither come to be nor pass away, nor be subject to motion or any other form of change. For making sense of these requires saying both is and is not of these things, and the path of is not cannot be taken. Similarly, what is must be homogeneous. For any interdifferentiation demands that we say of a part of what is, that it is not what another part is. In the third part of the poem, the goddess presents the way of doxa. What does doxa mean? The sense is both criteriological, according to which it could be translated as opinion, understood as an errant mode of conceptualization. In English, we sometimes say, that's just an opinion. What do we mean by that? We mean it's not guided by the right kinds of criteria. They're not required for acceptance. But can also be appearance, understood as the phenomenal character of things. Although appearances are deceitful, it is possible to give an account that involves minimal deviation from truth. All that is required is that we allow ourselves to say and think is not, positing it as a being of sorts. Non-being is in some sense real. Philosophical scholarship on Parmenides has concentrated on analysis of the account of what is, otherwise known as the living truth. How are we to understand the use of is? Up until the middle of the 20th century, the verb was generally given an existential meaning. On this account, the goddess is saying that the inquirer can only say that something exists, and it's meaningless to say that something does not exist. The subject of Esti was accordingly understood as something like a Russellian name. But attributing that notion of existence as such to an early Greek thinker is anachronistic in the extreme. What are the alternatives? One reading that has achieved considerable favor is that of the predicative or copulative Esti, according to which S is P. This has the advantage of comprehending an existential sense. So to say that an S is P is to say that S exists, and that P exists. Thus, many, including myself, attribute what Montgomery Firth called a fused sense of Esti to Parmenides. It's got the predicative and existential senses fused together. Thus, many, including myself, attribute a fused sense of Esti to Parmenides. Another question concerns the context of the kind of inquiry for which the goddess is indicating the way. Does the goddess's guidance concern any kind of being, including what the Aristotelian tradition would consider accidental being, as the cat is on the mat? Or do we follow many recent scholars in understanding Parmenides in the context of the naturalistic philosophers that preceded him, as inquiring into what things really are at the basic explanatory law, as Anaximenes argued that all things really are air, that the verb to be there has a very robust sense of giving what in the Aristotelian tradition is called the essence of things. Although central to understanding the significance of Parmenides' teachings, both in themselves and in regard to their influence on later philosophy, I leave the issue aside. Within the way of truth, the goddess is adamant that the way of an is totally exclusive of is not. There is an uncompromising distinction between being and non-being. So if you look at 11.2 on the second page of the handout, the goddess tells the boy, "Come now, I will tell you, and you, when you have heard the story, bring it away. About these routes of investigation are the only ones to be thought of. The one, both that it is and that it is not, is the path, and it is the case, and that it is not the case that it is not, is the path of persuasion, for it accompanies truth. The other, both that is not and that is not right, I declare you, is a trap entirely unable to be work. There's our principle of non-contradiction. And then also, he does go on and say, because of that, I don't have to go through. That's to be excluded as a contradiction. There's no room for contrariety in this, for excludes intermediates. Is or is not, nothing in between. Positing any intermediate is a matter of positing what is not either extreme. But if the fundamental distinction is between is and is not, when it's not one extreme, it's necessarily the other. The question of contrariety does arise in regards to the way of doxa. The consensus today is that the way of doxa gives us a serious account of reality as it is, or at least as it is perceived. The first step along this way, we are told, is to name two forms. The goddess reminds us at the outset of the illegitimacy of taking this step. So if we look at 11:8, and we go to line 54, we're going to learn that mortal opinions, they establish two forms to name in their judgment, of which it is not right to name one. That's one way of interpreting. In this they have gone astray. They have distinguished things opposite in body and established signs apart from one another. The one, the ethereal form of fire, wild, very light, the same as itself in every direction, but not the same as the other. But that other one in itself is opposite. Dark night and dense and heavy light. Significantly, these forms are not called beings, but are called morphi, shapes or appearances. Here and elsewhere, like in fragments 9, line 1, which is 11:9, the goddess is explicit that the forms have the status that they have by virtue of a human action, that of naming. Naming itself leads to the errancy, does not lead to the errancy of forms. Rather, it is the naming of two forms. Perhaps her meaning is that it is fine to name one form, conforming to it is, but not to name the other form, conforming to is not. Among those who opt for this reading are those who follow the traditional reading of Parmenides as a numerical monist, holding that there is just one thing. Others who interpret the line as prescribing the naming of one form do not understand it as a declaration of numerical monism, but as an assertion that one of a pair of opposites has an ontological status by which it is worthy. Another interpretation has the goddess mean that each form that is identified as an explanatory principle is to be understood as not the other. If one is to follow the strictures of the way of truth, neither form is to be used. So Patricia Kerr calls this antiomorphic opposites. You can't understand the right hand without appealing to it as the opposite of the left. You can't understand the left hand without understanding it's the opposite of the right. So each opposite is to be understood in terms of what the other is not. So maybe that's the problem for me. However we interpret the goddess, once we take the mistaken step of positing a primal duality, our path is laid out for us, a path not to truth, but to the best possible account, commensurate with the cognition of mortals. Unlike the way of truth, the way of doxa provides no clear articulation of its underlying logic. The sort of reasoning that is to guide our proceeding on this path is at best implicit. It is to be understood by considering the account to which the path leads. Unfortunately, much of the account is lost and needs to be extrapolated from scattered fragments, testimony, or sometimes of dubious reliability, and importantly, context. Parmenides' goddess was by no means the first to attempt in ancient Greece to account for regularities within the cosmos on the basis of one or more primal opposition. The Milesians understood there being a plane of contraries. We didn't call them contraries, but we had opposites. The Pythagoreans had their table of opposites. There may have been some influence from the Zoroastrian tradition. People speculated on this. So he was not the first to put forward opposites as a way of making sense of The philosophical strategy of the way of doxa and its implicit account of contraries is best understood by considering it in response to two Milesian philosophers, especially Anaximander and Anaximenes. Anaximander gives us a worldview according to which paired opposites emerge and do battle. We have reliable testimony that their source is in a pair law. Scholars differ on whether that's the infinite, the indefinite, indeterminate, or both. How these opposites emerge is unspecified. Parmenides first articulated the principle that nothing comes from nothing. So it would be anachronistic to say that that's what Anaximander is thinking of, that the opposites need to be already within the parallel, because otherwise they would come from. The principle that the ascendance of one opposite and then the other is dictated by temporal rhythms, and that is, I think, a reference to the cycle of the seasons, and perhaps day and night, as are the primary instances of this that he has in mind. We have here instances of what Aristotle would call action and passion. The hot heats the cold chills the heat. Such a process proceeds through intermediate stages. There is no hint in Anaximander that the intermediates are only phenomenal. So Anaximander's opposites we can consider contraries. And he's here followed by Anaximenes, who identifies one pair of contraries, the rare and the dense, as primary, and takes them to characterize air. So air can be condensed, as it is here, very, very thick air, or it can be rare, it can be very diffuse, as it is here. This process, too, must be understood as continuing. The water is somewhere between this and here. In the dasography for Anaximander, the contraries are named with the definite article and the new singular conjunction. The hot, the cold. What did he mean by the hot ontologically? The Greek is ambiguous. You can use the hot to refer to heat, feel the cold, or you can use it to refer to the subject that has the attribute, the cold water. So it's not clear what Anaximander means by the contraries. Are they things, or are they characteristics? The best answer, I think, is to say he does not distinguish either. Children sometimes don't distinguish them. Ooh, you're letting in the cold. They're not thinking, I need cold air. They reify characteristics, and that seems to be what the earliest Greek philosophers were. As moralizers, it's with Parmenides that being is understood for the first time as substantially like a thing. It's Parmenides who gives us the idea of a thing as a philosophical notion. What is retains its inner identity changeless. Are the forms dark and light likewise things? If so, and if the two forms exhaust being, it would seem that there is no room for any intermediates, and they are contradictories. But if light and darkness do not conform to the logical strictures of the way of truth, and are not things, so that it either exists or doesn't, perhaps there can be things that are intermediate, gray things. Let us consider the two forms more closely. One is fiery, bright, and gray. The other is dark, earthy, and dense. Whether we characterize them by luminescence, heat, or rarity, principles are, as we said before, antinomous. Unlike male and female, each of which you can make sense of without appeal to the other, you can only understand light as opposite of darkness. You can only understand heat as opposite of cold. You can only understand rarity as the opposite of density. Phenomenal change is a result of these principles changing their result in regard to one another. For example, we are told, and this is fragment 12, 11, 12 on the handout. He's talking about the cosmos. He's talking about the heavens. For the narrower reefs were filled with unmixed fire, the ones next to them with night, but a due amount of fire is inserted among it. And in the middle of these is the goddess who scares all things, but she rules over the hateful birth and unions of all things. So if we disregard change in place, each of the two forms is a kind of permanent, unchanging in what it is. The one, light, apparently identified remains light, and the other, dark, remains dark, and the two shift their position in regard to one another. So the sun is unmixed fire, the moon is fire mixed with darker. They're moving around in space. The question before us is whether there can be intermediates. Intermediates are not directly referred to in the few fragments of those. But if it's an account of how things seem to be, it must give us an account of money. It must give us an account of money. So where do these intermediates come from if the two fundamental forms are contradictory and do not admit coming in between? There's no third form. We've already looked at fragment 12. There's testimony by a late Greek doxographer who's given us reports of what early philosophers say. He helps us understand what the goddess is describing. I don't have that on hand. I'm read it. The air has separated out from the earth. It has evaporated because of the violent pressure exerted upon it, while the sun and the Milky Way are an exhalation of fire. The moon is a mixture of both of them, of air and fire. The ether occupies in the circle the highest position of all. Below it is arranged the fiery region, which is what we call the sky. And under this finally are located the regions that surround the earth. Notice that the goddess accounts for the celestial realm, not on the basis of two kinds, but also there's a third kind, air. Air seems to be a mixture of light and darkness. So phenomenal intermediates arise out of mixture. The question before us is, how do they do this? What is mixture? The term mixes, and also the term process, Parmenides uses versions of both terms, are technical terms in Aristotle's physics. Aristotle is keenly aware of the ontological questions that come up here, and we need to beware of assuming that Parmenides is using these terms in Aristotle's sense. Aristotle distinguishes mixture from qualitative alteration. So if I were to take a drop of ink and put it in the water, that would be mixture, because I have two different kinds that come together and interpenetrate to make a third kind. But if I were to put hot water in cold water, for Aristotle, that would not be mixture. That's alteration. The hot water heats the cold. Same kind of stuff, change in quality. that distinction between subject and quality is absent from Parmenides. So he is not going to be distinguishing between mixture and qualitative alteration. Hot and cold together are going to be a kind of mixture. Aristotle, I try to speed up a little bit. When Aristotle tries to understand how qualitative alteration occurs, it's a problem for him because he takes seriously the principle that nothing comes from nothing. So when the water becomes hot, where does the heat come from? Aristotle spends a lot of time on this problem. The simplest solution is to say the heat is already in the water potentially, and the hot water actualizes the potential. So it's not really the case that something comes from nothing. You have a different kind of being already in the water. That cannot be Parmenides' solution. We need to try to account for qualitative alteration or mixture in Parmenides with the smallest possible deviation from the way of truth. Remember that Parmenides says that mortals make just one mistake. So we need to attribute to mortals just one deviation from the logic of the way of truth. Now, of course, for Parmenides, any deviation from the way of truth is a contradiction. And everyone here knows that from a contradiction, anything follows. But I don't think Parmenides was thinking about it. One possibility is total interpenetration, where hot and cold interpenetrate each other through and through, so that in lukewarm water, every tiny little bit of water has both the hot and the cold. I don't think this is possible for Parmenides, because in the way of truth, and if anyone's interested, we can talk about this in the presence. Parmenides insists that being must be bound. He says it's a sphere. Some people think he means it's literally a sphere. Some people think it's metaphorical. Whatever he means, it's clear for him that reality is always determinate. It's this and not that. And if we were to have lukewarm being both hot and cold, it would lose the determinacy. And we would deviate from the logic of the way of truth in two ways. So I don't think that is what Parmenides has in mind. Somehow, the apparent mixture giving rise to intermediates must be accounted for while holding to the principle that nothing comes from nothing. The other option is to say, there are two options. One is to say that the intermediates that arise is only apparent. In reality, hot and cold is all there is. Lukewarm is only phenomenon. How might that be? One way of understanding that might be to say that it is at a microscopic level, that bits of hot are juxtaposed with bits of cold. And those of you who know Greek philosophy will know that this was an option which was, at least it's been argued, that it was put forward by Empedocles in regards to his four comments. Aristotle himself brings it up when he is arguing that mixture is real. He doesn't attribute this to anybody. It seems to me very possible that he has Parmenides' concept in mind. Once he argues, I won't read the passage for you, but he's saying, could it be that mixture if I were to put a drop of ink in here, it's really tiny pieces of water and tiny pieces of ink, but it's like grains of wheat and barley that when you mix them together and look at them from far away, it looks like an intermediate color. But if you have the eye of Linnaeus, who was legendary for his eyesight, you could see each one. If you had a microscope to use our technology, you could see each image. More familiar than to us than the sight of barley and wheat might be the phenomenon of a newspaper photograph, in which a mix of white and black dots gives rise to the appearance of gray. Note, however, that in accordance with his ontology, Aristotle presents this alternative account of nature as a matter of it being an aggregation of things, kernels of grain, and of white sand and black sand. It's not a combination of white and black as such, it's a combination of things. The photograph, similarly, is an aggregation of differently colored dots. Although we ourselves would not account for the appearance of lukewarm temperature in this way, as a matter of hot particles heating, hot particles, that's the cold particles, rather for us there's an energy transfer, whereby the heat, the kinetic energy of the grounding motion of the molecules conveys itself to other molecules so that they reach an intermediate stage of energy. I can think about this. You might account for the phenomenon of heating as a matter of particles of hot interspersed with greater concentrations among the particles of cold. On such an analysis, light and dark do not truly affect each other. Rather, they come to have different spatial arrangements in regard to one another. One object being heated by light would necessarily be understood as bits of the hot from the second object interspersing themselves among the bits of the first. By process of elimination, I think that this is Parmenides' account. Hot is hot. The is there is very, very strong. Hot cannot stop being hot. It cannot change being hot. It cannot disappear as hot. Cold is cold. It cannot change being cold. It cannot disappear as a cold thing. There is a deviation from strict Parmenidean logic by saying that we have both hot and both cold, but both behave as a Parmenidean being. Each retains its basic character. They do not affect each other. They come to new arrangements in the life. And total interpenetration is made impossible because for Parmenides, being must be determinate. It must have edges. Qualitative alteration is made impossible because there can be no coming to be or passing away in regard to what each kind is. There is no third kind. So by process of elimination, I think that when Aristotle was giving his account of mixture as juxtaposition, he had in mind doxa of Parmenides, which he probably had access to and knows. So that I speculate, and I think there are good reasons for it, is Parmenides' account of intermediates of the phenomenal world. And if that is so, there is no room for discussion. For contrariety, there is only contradiction. Hot and cold are, as it were, physical contradictions. Thank you.
No, go ahead first. Bueno, profesor, yo le voy
As you start.
Thank you very much for this presentation. And I wonder how Parmenides can evaluate universal statements. For example, all writing is black. How can we evaluate? Because this is a paradigmatic case in history of science, because scientists discovered in Australia some railways that is black. And this, and how they differentiate between this statement and the other, that all the sum of the angles of each triangle is equal to two right angles. How can you evaluate these two statements according to Parmenides?
That's a very good question, because if we have universal propositions and we get clear on the logic, then as we heard yesterday, we need some account of contrary propositions as well. The easy answer is to say that he is a very primitive logician and is not thinking about the logic of universal statements. It is possible that for Parmenides, there is no multiplicity as such. The traditional reading of the way of truth, which is what you'll get if you read Plato or Aristotle interpreting Parmenides, is that there's just one view. So some people think that Parmenides is a mystic. Some people think that he is propounding paradoxes. But on one view, he is a non-dualist. There is just one thing. So if there's just one thing, there is no domain of discourse over which we quantify. There is a universal statement and a singular statement will have the same truth value. Of course, in the way of doxa, we have two things, but they're not both things. So we can't, it would be very weird to quantify over both beings, because darkness is not really a being. It has an illegitimate status of a being. At a meta-theoretical level, we could presumably say, well, for all forms are such that they retain their character changeless. And then we have a universal proposition. And then we have the kinds of problems that we have. So that's the best that I can answer. It's true that once you have, if you say that being is a sphere, this is the criticism against Parmenides that you have in Plato's dialogue called the Socrates. If you say that being is a sphere, you've got the center, you've got the edge, you have more than one thing. So you can't be a strict monist. If in doxa, we clearly have more than one spatial position. We've got light here, and we've got dark there. So here and there are a multiplicity. And we make sense of the phenomena by virtue of places. He is not reifying places the way in which some physicists today would reify places, in the sense of physical reality as X, Y, Z, and T coordinates, having certain characters predicated on them. So I would like to be able to give a more robust answer for Parmenides, but this is at the very, very, very beginnings of Western logic. Simply as a thought about that. It's a good question. Thank you. You're showing the limitations of the scheme, and you're showing the kinds of problems that would come up if you are, say, a non-dualist Hindu and you believe that there is just one thing, ultimately. Kabbalah, the same thing, ultimately, just one. Then what's the status of logic? Does logic not hold at this very, very basic, truest level of all? It's an important question.
All questions?
Thank you for your talk. So, as I said, it's like I'm more interested in philosophical counseling. So, I'm going to ask you something. So, how does the Parmenides argue that what is and what is not help us to recognize the fallacies in daily thoughts or thoughts? How can we ask for help from Parmenides? That's the question.
Well, the question that you are asking bears on this question of what the project of the poem is. Two possible answers. There are more than two, but here are two possible answers. One is the traditional answer, that this way of truth has nothing to do with the way of mortals. It is a divine revelation. And when we are asking where the water is, or how to turn on the microphone, we are not at that level. The second possibility, which more and more scholars in ancient philosophy hold to today, is that Parmenides is giving us an account of the logic of scientific explanation. Anaximenes is a kind of scientist. He's explaining that everything is water. And he says that's why when you purse your lips, the air feels cold, and when you go, the air feels hot. And he's giving it a naive explanation, but he's explaining. And so Parmenides, on this more contemporary, is giving us an account of what theoreticians do. So, on an everyday level, when I am asking how to turn on the lights, I am not doing theoretical science. That's not the way. So, he's on either account. The way of truth is not an account of everyday life. But what is the way of doxa? The way of doxa also seems to be a kind of theoretical discourse. He's not engaged in ordinary language analysis. He's not engaged in analyzing the language of poetry. The first part of the poem is a poem. It's full of metaphor. Goddesses and girls and doors swinging open and noises. There is a disconnect between the logic. And so our first paper yesterday had to do with the square of opposition and how it might get beyond the semantics of the predicate logic and Frege that maybe, and also our last paper yesterday had to do with how the strict truth tables might not really stand on their own, but might bend and be in some way determined by everyday life. Would Parmenides accept that? I think not. But the poem as he gives it to us is not for everyday life.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I was wondering one thing you said earlier that Parmenides is really a position, kind of first solution, and I have to think to ask you that. Well, what can we understand when you say he is a magician? Because if one thinks logic as accountability, Aristotle was the first magician. So what kind of
logic he is creating here? And the second question is he the first, as a lot of people say, the first one to use the principle of non-contradiction?
Thank you for the question. Of course, who is a logician and who is not? How a logician would say, yeah, it is a difficult question. But he is, he's giving us, self-consciously giving us a way. The word here on page 146 is giving us the roots of investigation. The Greek there is giving us, the word for roots is hodos, which literally means a way. And investigation is zetesis. You're looking for something. So he's, in a sense, our word method comes from the word hodos. He's giving us a method. And what does the method govern? You look at 11.3. The same thing can both be thought of and can be. So in order to understand how things are, he's giving us the method of thinking. And then in 11.6, it is right both to say and to think that it is what it is. So we've got the idea that what is sayable is what is thinkable, which is what is possible. And this is a foundational principle to all Western philosophy. If we're trying to wonder, could there be a brain in the vat? Could I be a brain in the vat? Well, I kind of think it. And see if there's something contradictory when I get very, very clear about what a brain in the vat might be. Okay? Some people say no, no, and say yes. But you do a thought experiment and you see if a contradiction arises. You see if is and is not a clash. So he's giving us a method and he's giving us a rule. He's giving us only one rule. And so, of course, you want to know about how he will deal with singular propositions, existential propositions that are not universal. He does not go so far. But he is giving us a way. And he's explicitly, self-consciously giving us a way. This is a big issue in anthropology, or at least it was 20, 30 years ago. Do indigenous pre-technological peoples, are they rational? Well, of course they're rational. But they don't articulate theoretical principles to govern the thinking that they do every day. Parmenides is the first of the ancient Greeks that connects with this, and that's why that whole
Mm-hmm. More questions? Sorry? You want to go down?
Thank you for the presentation. It's refreshing, always going behind logic from a historical perspective. Super refreshing, perhaps. That's why I motivated Heidegger to go that deep into this stuff. Because I was hearing this feels like philosophy and not just in a like a vest constrained by logic that we have to do in a certain way. You can feel how you get liberated from that. How important is Heidegger in this regard? Obviously, isn't taken into account in these kind of interpretations. And a question related to it. Do you think that for philosophizing, or at least good philosophizing, is required a solid logical apparatus or not?
Two very interesting questions. Heidegger was very interested in Parmenides, as many of you know. He does not read Parmenides as a logician, at least in the sense that I was thinking. For Parmenides, the way of truth is aletheia, undisclosedness of being. So he reads Heidegger as a Heideggerian. And he thinks that it is Plato, and especially Aristotle, who limits our ideas of what philosophical thinking can and should be. Of course, Heidegger thinks the sort of logic that many of us here are familiar with is a kind of technological device that actually hides being from us. That is not my reading of Parmenides. There are very few specialists in ancient philosophy today who read Heidegger that way. That does not mean that Heidegger should not, on Parmenides should not be read. You read it to understand Heidegger. I think there's some, I don't see where Heidegger says, did the pre-Socratics actually mean this? Well, who cares? It's being talking to me. Okay. So that is not my reading of Parmenides. The second question I think you're asking is, do you need logic to philosophize?
Not specifically logic like an apron as such or as logic as it is logic nowadays. Because it's, I guess for me, I cannot cover it not very far. Everything that there is out there.
I am skeptical of that. We at my university used to require a class in informal logic of all students, and we would take it before they started reading Plato and Aristotle. I am doubtful that learning the basics of Aristotelian syllogistic, or even the basics of the predicate calculus, make people think more precisely. It can be a very valuable tool for analyzing. Formalization can be a very valuable tool for analyzing certain logical properties. Does you mean put the modal qualifier here, or do you put it inside the universal? Natural language is ambiguous, but to be clear on the argument, so many times formal logic is a very, very valuable tool. But one can make the same distinctions without the use of formal logic. So I do not believe we do require all of our graduate students in classes of formal logic, but that's simply so that they can read the language.
Just one more. Don't you think that it's problematic stating that Parmenides was the first logician, considering Aristotle critique in the Physics 4 that Parmenides was among those negated, which out of which his premises negated the principle of contradiction stated, because that it's a tough position to hold, considering that Aristotle himself stated that he negated the principle of contradiction.
This is true. For Aristotle's reading of Parmenides is unusual because for Aristotle, Parmenides is starting from the premise one is. And that is not a premise that we find in the fragments of the poems and the So maybe it's not, maybe he knows something we don't, but Aristotle's reading of his predecessors is often extremely valuable, but should be taken with a bit of caution. In sophistical language, Aristotle actually says, I am the first logician. And so and of course, there are many of us, myself included, who do sometimes give their arguments and contradict themselves, even if we recognize or even teach the principle of non-contradiction.
Thank you. I'm wondering if this account can handle different kinds of controversies. I see that it works really well for gray and lukewarm. But what about the difference between left and right is maybe straightforward, or fast and slow is kind of middling speed? Can you you go fast for a little bit and then slow for a little bit? Is that why I'm going and medium speed?
That's a really good question. Both fast and slow and left and right deal with spatial differentiation. And that was the Elianic stranger's so-called parasite, killing of his father, in the Sophists. If you say that being is a sphere, you've got your left-hand side, you have your right-hand side. So one is not the other. So you have non-being. So the left-hand side is not the right. So the Elianic stranger or Plato would not have made that criticism if spatial distinctions were accounted for by this logic. The easiest way of dealing with that issue is to say that the account of being as a sphere is metaphorical, that ultimate being, it might be God, is outside space, outside time, ordinary distinctions. And of course, the Neoplatonic philosophers understood from it in the same way, and that understanding of God made its way into the medieval tradition of Islam, Judaism, Christianity. So there is a direct line there, according to which ultimately there are no spatial distinctions. That said, in doxa, there are spatial distinctions. You have left and right, up and down, you have things moving, and that does require a logic that recognizes intermediacy. If the hot is going from here to there, you've got the intermediate in between. So I cannot give you an adequate account of how Parmenides would have dealt with that. It seems to be the but maybe I don't do that enough.
Good morning. I appreciate your time here. I'm sorry, but I don't speak English very well, but I make everything I can. My question is very easy. It's about the situation in this moment from Parmenides on this concept about doxa. But the point is about, for example, the interpretation, the concept. For example, the people, example, in city in this moment, on the philosopher people understand the concept. But for the normal people, the older people, is one interpretation about, for example, doxa. You have a very good question, is nothing comes from nothing. But the answer is from the older people to these people, not from. It's difficult. It's different situation when you speak with older philosopher or older people on the normal people. Sorry, but this is not but this is my point. What is the position from Parmenides about this concept in her mind, in these people, the interpretation is my point. It's not the truth, it's not always the truth. One interpretation is clear.
Some of it is clear, but let me speak to it. I think your question amounted to it, and please, and Tito Spanish, you could try that too. But let me, he is, what is doxa for? If you look at the bottom of page 148 of the handout, 148, at the end of 11.8, the last two lines, he tells us what doxa is supposed to be about. I declare to you all the ordering, I think the word there is the cosmos, all the ordering as it appears, so that no mortal judgment may ever overtake you. What does that mean? It's in the language of competition. So presumably, doxa is being given so that when people are in a group philosophizing, and back then, the sophists and the poets would go from town to town, and they would read, and then other people would respond. It was a bit like a conference. This is a very friendly conference, but maybe back then the conference was more agonistic. You would have someone saying this, no, you are wrong, someone saying this. So this is the, if you were to just, if I were to just come up here today and say, is, not much to talk. But I need to speak the language and deal with the same problems that other people are speaking. So he is, to use your phrase, speaking to older philosophers. He is not speaking to somebody not interested in philosophy. He's saying this is a way of accounting for things that you should respect. And he's doing so in a way that will make people think, wow, Parmenides gave the best talk today. I want to send my students to graduate school with him. He wants to impress, even though ultimately it's false. Did that speak to your question? Or did it speak to your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
So do we have questions? If not, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
We will have a coffee break now and we start again.
We're going to the lobby. We're going back to the lobby for the coffee break. And then we go back for the next topic.